Hi, my sweet friends, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. We're reading today from Robinson Crusoe, starting with Chapter 12, The Savages Return. When the settled season began to come in, the first thing I did was to lay by a certain quantity of provisions as the store for our voyage. I intended in a week or a fortnight's time to open the dock and launch out our boat. I was busy one morning upon something of this kind when I called to Friday and bade him to go to the seashore and see if he could find a turtle or a tortoise, a thing which we generally got once a week for the sake of the eggs as well as the flesh. Friday had not been gone long when he came running back and fairly flew over my outer wall or fence. Before I had time to speak to him, he cried out to me, "Oh, master! Oh, master!" Excuse me. "Sorrow! Oh, sorrow! Oh, bad!" "What's the matter, Friday?" I said. "Oh, yonder there," said he. 1, 2, 3 canoe. 1, 2, 3. By this way of speaking, I concluded that there were 6, but on inquiry I found that there were but 3. "Well, Friday," said I, "do not be frightened," and I heartened him up as well as I could. However, I saw that the poor fellow was most terribly scared. I comforted him as well as I could, and told him I was in as much danger as he, and that they would eat me as well as him. "But," said I, "Friday, we must resolve to fight them. Can you fight, Friday?" "Me shoot," said he, "but there come many great number." "No matter for that," said I, "our guns will frighten those that we do not kill." I asked him whether if I resolved to defend him, he would defend me and stand by me and do just as I bade him. He said, "Me die when you die, master." I made him take the 2 fowling pieces and load them with swan shot, as big as small pistol bullets. Then I took 4 muskets and loaded them with 2 slugs and 5 small bullets each, and my 2 pistols I loaded with a brace of bullets each. I hung my great sword, as usual, naked by my side, and gave Friday his hatchet. When I had thus prepared myself, I took up my perspective glass and went up to the side of the hill to see what I could discover. I found quickly by my glass that there were 21 savages, 3 prisoners, and 3 canoes. Their whole business seemed to be a triumphant banquet upon these 3 human bodies, but they were doing nothing more than what I had observed was usual with them. They were landed, not where they had been when Friday made his escape, but nearer to my creek, where the shore was low, and where a thick wood came close almost down to the sea. This, with the abhorrence of the inhuman errand these wretches came about, so filled me with indignation that I came down to Friday and told him I was resolved to go down to them and kill them all, and asked him if he would stand by me. He had now gotten over his fright and was very cheerful. He told me as before, "Me die when you bid die." I entered the wood with all possible wariness and silence, Friday following close at my heels, and marched till I came to the skirt of the wood on the side which was next to them, but one corner of the wood lay between me and them. Here I called softly to Friday, and showing him a great tree which was just at the corner of the wood, excuse me, I bade him go to the tree and bring me word if he could see there plainly what they were doing. He did so and came immediately back to me and told me that they might be plainly viewed there. They were all about the fire, eating the flesh of one of their prisoners, and another lay bound upon the sand a little from them, whom he said they would kill next. That fired the very soul within me. He told me that it was not one of their own nation, but one of the bearded men whom he had told me of that came to their country in the boat. I was filled with horror at the very naming of the white bearded man, and going to the tree, I saw plainly by my glass a white man, who lay upon the beach with his hands and feet tied with flags or things like rushes. I saw that he was a European and had clothes on. There was another tree and a little thicket beyond it, about 50 yards nearer to them than the place where I was, which I saw I might reach undiscovered. Excuse me. Then I should be within half a shot of them. So I withheld my passion, and going back about 20 paces, I got behind some bushes which held all the way till I came to the other tree, and then I came to a little rising ground which gave me a full view of them at the distance of about 80 yards. I had now not a moment to lose, for 19 of the dreadful wretches sat upon the ground all close huddled together, and had just sent the other 2 to butcher the poor Christian and bring him, perhaps limb by limb, to their fire. Already they had stooped down to untie the bands at his feet. I turned to Friday. "Now, Friday," said I, "do as I bid you." Friday said he would. "Then, Friday," said I, "do exactly as you see me do. Fail in nothing." So I set down one of the muskets and the fowling piece upon the ground, and Friday did the same with his. With the other musket I took my aim at the savages, bidding him do the same. I asked him if he was ready, and he said, "Yes." "Then fire at them," said I, and at the same moment I fired also. Friday took his aim so much better than I that on the side he shot, he killed 2 of them and wounded 3 more. On my side, I killed 1 and wounded 2. They were in a dreadful consternation. All of them who were not hurt jumped to their feet immediately, but they did not know which way to run or which way to look, for they knew not from whence their destruction came. Friday kept his eyes close upon me, so that as I bade him, he might observe what I did. As soon as the first shot was made, I threw down the piece and took up the fowling piece, and Friday did the same. He saw me cock and take aim, and he did the same again. "Are you ready, Friday?" said I. "Yes," said he. "Let fly then," said I, and with that I fired again among the amazed wretches, and so did Friday. As our pieces were now loaded with what I call swan shot, or small pistol bullets, we found only 2 drop, but so many were wounded that they ran about yelling and screaming like mad creatures, all bloody and wounded, most of them. 3 more fell quickly after, but they were not quite dead. "Now, Friday," said I, laying down the discharged pieces and taking up the musket which was yet loaded, "follow me." Upon this I rushed out of the wood and showed myself, and Friday followed close at my heels. As soon as I perceived that they saw me, I shouted as loud as I could and bade Friday do so too. Running as fast as I could, which by the way was not very fast, I made directly toward the poor victim, who was, as I said, lying upon the beach between the place where they sat and the sea. The 2 butchers, who were just going to work with him, had left him at the surprise of our first fire and fled in a terrible fright to the seaside and had jumped into a canoe. 3 more of the rest did the same. I turned to Friday and bade him step forward and fire at them. He understood me immediately, and running about 40 yards to be near them, he shot at them, and I thought he had killed them all, for I saw them all fall in a heap in the boat, though I saw 2 of them up again quickly. However, he killed 2 of them and wounded the 3rd, so that he lay in the bottom of the boat as if he had been dead. While Friday fired at them, I pulled out my knife and cut the flags that bound the poor victim. Loosing his hands and feet, I lifted him up and asked him in the Portuguese tongue what he was. He answered in Latin, "Christianus," but he was so weak and faint that he could scarcely stand or speak. I took my bottle out of my pocket and gave it to him, making signs that he should drink, which he did, and I gave him a piece of bread, which he ate. Then I asked him what countryman he was, and he said, "Espagnol." Being a little recovered, he let me know by all the signs he could possibly make how much he was in my debt for his deliverance. I said in as good Spanish as I could, "We will talk afterwards, but we must fight now. If you have any strength left, take the pistol and sword and lay about you." He took them very thankfully, and no sooner had he the arms in his hands, but as if they had put new vigor into him, he flew upon his murderers like a fury, and had cut 2 of them in pieces in an instant, for they were so surprised and frightened that they could make no resistance, nor attempt to escape. I kept my piece in my hand still, without firing, being willing to keep my charge ready, because I had given the Spaniard my pistol and sword. I called to Friday and bade him run up to the tree from which we had first fired, and bring the arms which lay there, that had been discharged, which he quickly did. Then, giving him my musket, I sat down to load all the rest again, and bade them come to me when they wanted. While I was loading these pieces, there happened a fierce engagement between the Spaniard and one of the savages, who made at him with one of their great wooden swords, the same weapon that was to have killed him before, if I had not prevented it. The Spaniard, who was very bold, though weak, had fought this Indian a good while, and had cut him 2 great wounds on his head, but the savage, being a stout, lusty fellow, closing in with him, had thrown him down, and was wringing my sword out of his hand, when the Spaniard, though undermost, wisely quitted the sword, drew the pistol from his girdle, and shot him dead on the spot. Friday, accompanied by the Spaniard, now pursued the fleeing savages with such deadly purpose that only 3 of them were able to reach their canoe. These were so badly wounded that I doubted if they would be able to row long enough to reach their home. Even so, I decided to follow them, but when I was in the other canoe, I was surprised to find a poor savage lying there alive, bound hand and foot as the Spaniard had been, for the slaughter. He was almost dead with fear, not knowing what the matter was, for he had not been able to look up over the side of the boat. He was tied so hard, neck and heels, and had been tied so long that he had little life in him. I immediately cut the twisted flags, or rushes, that bound him, and would have helped him up, but he could not stand or speak, but groaned most piteously, believing, it seemed still, that he was only unbound in order to be killed. When Friday came, I bade him speak to him and tell him of his deliverance, and pulling out my bottle, made him give the poor wretch a dram, which with the news of his being delivered revived him, and he sat up in the boat. But when Friday came to hear him speak and looked in his face, it would have moved anyone to tears to have seen how Friday kissed him, embraced him, hugged him, cried, laughed, hallooed, jumped about, danced, sang, then cried again, wrung his hands, beat his own face and head, and then sang and jumped about again like a distracted creature. It was a good while before I could make him speak to me or tell me what was the matter, but when he came a little to himself, he said that it was his father. It is not easy for me to express how it moved me to see what ecstasy and filial affection had worked in this poor savage at the sight of his father, and at the thought of his being delivered from death. Nor, indeed, can I describe half the extravagance of his affection after this, for he went into the boat and out of the boat a great many times. When he went into him, he would sit down by him, open his breast, and hold his father's head close to his bosom half an hour together to nourish it. Then he would take his arms and ankles, which were numbed and stiff with the binding, and chafe and rub them with his hands. Friday was so busy about his father that I could not find it in my heart to take him off for some time, but after I thought he could leave him a little, I called him to me, and he came jumping and laughing and pleased to the highest extreme. Then I asked him if he had given his father any bread. He shook his head and said, "None, ugly dog, eat all up self." So I gave him a cake of bread out of a little pouch I carried on purpose. I also gave him a dram for himself, but he would not taste it, but carried it to his father. I had in my pocket also 2 or 3 bunches of my raisins, so I gave him a handful of them for his father. He had no sooner given his father these raisins than I saw him come out of the boat and run away as if he had been bewitched. He ran at such a rate, for he was the swiftest-footed fellow that I saw, that he was out of sight as it were in an instant, and though I called and hallooed after him, it was all one. Away he went, and in a quarter of an hour I saw him come back again, though not so fast as he went. As he came near, I found that his pace was slacker, because he had something in his hand. When he came to me, I found that he had been quite home for an earthen jug or pot to bring his father some fresh water, and that he had brought 2 more cakes or loaves of bread. The bread he gave me, but the water he carried to his father. It revived his father more than all the rum or spirits I had given him, for he was just fainting with thirst. When his father had drunk, I called Friday to know if there was any water left. He said yes, and I bade him give it to the poor Spaniard, who was as much in want of it as his father, and I sent one of the cakes that Friday had brought to the Spaniard too, who was indeed very weak. He was reposing himself upon a green place under the shade of a tree, and his limbs were also very stiff, and very much swelled with the rude bandage he had been tied with. When I saw that, upon Friday's coming up to him with the water, he sat up and drank and took the bread and began to eat. I went up to him and gave him a handful of raisins. He looked up in my face with all the tokens of gratitude and thankfulness that could appear in any countenance. He was so weak, notwithstanding the way that he had exerted himself in the fight, that he could not stand upon his feet. He tried to do it 2 or 3 times, but was really not able. His ankles were so swelled and so painful to him. I bade him sit still and caused Friday to rub his ankles and bathe them with rum as he had done his father's. I observed that the poor, affectionate creature, every 2 minutes, or perhaps less, all the while that he was here, turned his head to look for his father. At last he missed him. At once he started up, and without speaking a word, flew with such swiftness to him that one could scarcely perceive his feet touching the ground as he went. But when he reached him, he found that he had only laid himself down to ease his limbs. So Friday came back to me presently, and I then told him to help the Spaniard to the boat. He took him upon his back and carried him beside his father in the boat, and I stepped out again, launched the boat off, and paddled it along the shore faster than I could walk, though the wind blew pretty hard too. He brought them safely into our creek, and leaving them in the boat, ran away to get the other canoe. As he passed me, I spoke to him and asked him whither he went. He told me, "Go fetch more boat." So away he went like the wind, for surely never man nor horse ran like him. He had the other canoe in the creek almost as soon as I got to it by land. He took me over and then went to help our new guests out of the boat, which he did, but they were neither of them able to walk, so that poor Friday knew not what to do. At last we made a kind of hand barrow to lay them on, and Friday and I carried them both together upon it between us. But when we got them to the outside of our wall or fortification, we were at a worse loss than before, for it was impossible to get them over, and I was resolved not to break it down. So we set to work again, and in about 2 hours' time, Friday and I had made a very handsome tent, covered with old sails and boughs of trees. It was in the space outside our outer fence, and between that and the grove of young wood which I had planted. Here we made them 2 beds of such things as I had, good rice straw, with blankets laid upon it to lie on, and another to cover them on each bed. My island was now peopled, and I thought myself very rich in subjects. It was a merry reflection which I frequently made how like a king I looked. First of all, the whole country was my own mere property, so that I had an undoubted right of dominion. Secondly, my people were perfectly subjected. I was the absolute lord and lawgiver. They all owed their lives to me, and were ready to lay down their lives, if there had been occasion of it, for me. It was remarkable, too, that I had but 3 subjects, and they were of 3 different religions. My man Friday was a Protestant. His father was a pagan and a cannibal. The Spaniard was a papist. However, I allowed liberty of conscience to all my subjects. As soon as I had made my 2 weak rescued prisoners secure, and given them shelter and a place to rest upon, I began to think of making some provision for them. The first thing I did was to order Friday to take a yearling goat out of my particular flock to be killed. Then I cut off the hinder quarter, and chopping it into small pieces, I set Friday to work boiling and stewing. Thus we made them a very good dish of flesh and broth, and we all enjoyed it and ate heartily. After we had dined, or rather supped, I ordered Friday to take one of the canoes and go and get our muskets and other firearms from the place of battle. The next day I ordered him to go and bury the dead bodies of the savages, which lay open to the sun and would presently be offensive. I also ordered him to bury the horrid remains of their barbarous feast. All these things he punctually performed. I then began to enter into a little conversation with my 2 new subjects. First, I set Friday to inquire of his father what he thought of the escape of the savages in that canoe, and whether we might expect a return of them with a power too great for us to resist. His first opinion was that the savages in the boat never could live out the storm which blew that night they went off, but must be drowned or driven south to those other shores where they were sure to be devoured. As to what they would do if they came on shore, he said that he knew not, but it was his opinion that they were so dreadfully frightened with the manner of their being attacked, the noise and the fire, that he believed that they would tell their people that they were all killed by thunder and lightning, and not by the hand of a man, and that the 2 which appeared, namely Friday and I, were 2 heavenly spirits and furies come down to destroy them, and not with weapons. And this old savage was right, for though they escaped the sea, they gave such dreadful accounts in their own country, as I heard afterwards, that they never ventured from that part to my island again. But I was under continual apprehensions for some time, and kept upon my guard, I and all my army, for, as there were now 4 of us, I would have ventured upon 100 of them in the open field. In a little time, however, no more canoes appearing, the fear of their coming wore off, and I began to take into consideration my former thoughts of a voyage to the mainland. I was likewise assured by Friday's father that I might depend upon good usage from their nation on his account if I would go. One day I had a serious discourse with the Spaniard, and learned that there were 16 more of his countrymen and Portuguese who had been cast away and had made their escape to that side. The Spaniard told me that they lived there at peace indeed with the savages, but were very sore put to it for necessaries, and indeed for life. I asked him all the particulars of their voyage, and found that they were a Spanish ship bound from the Rio de la Plata to Havana. They had been directed to leave their loading there, which was chiefly hides and silver, and to bring back what European goods they could meet with there. They had had 5 Portuguese seamen on board whom they took out of another wreck. 5 of their own men were drowned when first their ship was lost, and those that escaped passed through infinite dangers and hazards, and arrived almost starved on the cannibal coast, where they expected to be devoured every moment. He told me that they had some arms with them, but they were perfectly useless, for they had neither powder nor ball. The washing of the sea had spoiled all their powder but a little, which they had used when they first landed to provide themselves some food. I asked him if they had formed no design of making an escape. He said that they had had many consultations about it, but having neither vessel, nor tools to build one, nor provisions of any kind, their counsels always ended in tears and despair. I asked him how he thought they would receive a proposal from me, which might tend toward an escape, and whether, if they were all here, it might not be done. He told me that they were all under the greatest distress imaginable, and if I would undertake their relief, they would live and die by me. Upon these assurances, I resolved to venture to relieve them if possible, and to send the old savage and the Spaniard over to them to treat. But when he had gotten all things in readiness to go, the Spaniard himself started an objection, which had so much prudence in it on the one hand, and so much sincerity on the other, that I could not but be well satisfied in it. By his advice, I put off the deliverance of his comrades for at least half a year. He had been with us now about a month, during which time I had let him see in what manner I had provided with the assistance of Providence for my support. He saw what stock of corn and rice I had laid up, which, while it was more than sufficient for myself, was not sufficient, at least without good husbandry, for my family, now that it was increased to the number of 4. Much less would it be sufficient if his countrymen, who were, as he said, 14, should come over. Least of all would it be sufficient to victual our vessel, if we should build one, for a voyage to any of the Christian colonies of America. So he told me that he thought that it would be more advisable to let him and the 2 others dig and cultivate more land, as much as I could spare seed to sow. Then, if we should wait another harvest, we might have a supply of grain for his countrymen when they should come. Want might be a temptation to them to disagree, or not think themselves delivered, otherwise than out of one difficulty into another. The Spaniard's caution was so seasonable, and his advice so good, that I could not but be very well pleased with his proposal, as well as satisfied with his fidelity. So we fell to digging, all 4 of us, as well as the wooden tools we were furnished with permitted. In about a month's time, by the end of which it was seed time, we had gotten enough land cured and trimmed up to sow 22 bushels of barley on, and 16 jars of rice, which was, in short, all the seed we had to spare. At the same time, I contrived to increase my little flock of tame goats as much as I could, and to this purpose I made Friday and the Spaniard go out one day, and myself with Friday the next day, for we took our turns. By this means, we got about 20 young kids to breed up with the rest, for whenever we shot the dam, we saved the kids, and added them to our flock. But above all, the season for curing the grapes coming on, I caused such a prodigious quantity to be hung up in the sun that I believe, had we been at Alicante, where raisins are cured, we should have filled 60 or 80 barrels. These, with our bread, formed a great part of our food. It was now harvest, and our crop was in good order. It was not the most plentiful increase I had seen in the island, but it was enough to answer our end. From our 22 bushels of barley, we brought in and threshed out more than 220 bushels, and an equal proportion of the rice, which was store enough for our food until the next harvest, though all the 14 Spaniards had been on shore with me. If we had been ready for a voyage, it would very plentifully have victualled our ship to have carried us to any part of America. When we had thus stored our grain, we fell to work to make great wicker baskets in which we kept it. The Spaniard was very handy and dexterous at this part. And now, having a full supply of food for all the guests I expected, I gave the Spaniard leave to go over to the mainland to see what he could do with those whom he had left behind him there. I gave him strict charge not to bring any man with him who would not first swear in the presence of himself and the old savage that he would in no way injure, fight with, or attack the person he should find in the island, who was so kind as to send for him to deliver him. Each man was to swear that he would stand by and defend that person against all such attempts, and wherever he went he would be entirely under and subjected to his command. This should be put in writing and signed by all the men. Under these instructions, the Spaniard and the old savage went away in one of the canoes which they came in, when they were brought as prisoners to be devoured by the savages. I gave each of them a musket and about 8 charges of powder and ball, charging them to be very careful of both, and not to use either of them but upon very urgent occasions. This was a cheerful work, being the first measures used by me in view of my deliverance for now 27 years and some days. I gave them provisions of bread and dried grapes sufficient for themselves for many days, and sufficient for all the countrymen for about 8 days. Wishing them a good voyage, I let them go after I had agreed with them about a signal they should hang out at their return, by which I should know them at a distance before they came on shore. They went away with a fair gale on the day that the moon was at the full, by my account, in the month of October, as nearly as I could tell. I had waited for them no less than 8 days, when a strange and unforeseen occurrence intervened, of which the like has not, perhaps, been heard in history. And on that note, we're going to stop and start tomorrow with Chapter 13. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.